This video is not necessarily designed to be a health infomercial. What this video will attempt to answer is, will sitting in a sauna or a hot bath for hours at a time in a period 24 to 48 hours before competition ultimately improve performance? I think it almost sounds obvious. If you asked a guy off the street, would sitting in a sauna for a day and experiencing extreme dehydration be a good idea before a sporting event, they would probably look at you like you're a bit thick. However, it's all well and good dismissing this process until you are the one locked in the cage facing a taller guy with bigger muscles. Fact is, there are a lot of fighters undergoing this process who are achieving good results. I don't think any event signified how far the boat is being pushed on weight cutting more than the recent UFC 298 card. According to numbers released by the California State Athletic Commission, 6 of the 8 main card fighters gained more than 20 pounds from the time of the first weigh-in to a second weigh-in just before the fights. 2 fighters on the card surely stretched the limit of what's possible, with Paulo Costa and Jeff Neal gaining 29.7 and 30.3 pounds respectively. When you look at the numbers for UFC 298 generally, you could be left with the impression that more serious fighters cut more weight, but I think this is a red herring for reasons which I will get into later. The first bit of evidence which I'm going to get into is this study published by Barabo and colleagues. You can find a link to it in the description. The title says, "Rapid Weight Gain and Weight Differential Predict Competitive Success in 2,100 Professional Combat Sports Athletes." This study actually implies that cutting more weight predicts success. To quote, "Winners regain significantly more absolute weight. This is an average of 5.9 kg in winners versus 5.3 kg in losers. To put that into perspective, as a 5 kg cut would be significantly more arduous for a flyweight than a light heavyweight. Winners regained an average of 8.7% of their body weight, whilst losers regained an average of 7.9%. One thing to bear in mind about this study is that they did not take into account baseline measurements. So you could potentially have had 2 fighters who were 6 kilos over the weight a week out. Yet one of these fighters implemented an effective refueling procedure, whereas the other may have used more amateurish methods. However, the study generally seems to imply that when comparing more modest weight cutting numbers, cutting weight is beneficial. I don't think this is a massive shock. Anyone who has ever tried a no-carb diet will probably find that they shed weight fast. Plus, in terms of sitting in a sauna, dropping the first kilo or so of water weight could potentially be a pleasurable experience. This doesn't answer the question, though, of whether more extreme cuts, such as losing 9 to 10 kilos, are effective. It's known that they can be effective because world champions are implementing these kind of cuts. However, potentially these fighters could achieve better results if they were competing one weight class up. Reading between the lines of what's going on, the kind of negative effects I would expect to see from a bad weight cut are reduced cardio, probably slightly worse performance in explosive actions. I would also expect to see reductions in metrics that are harder to measure, such as general timing and coordination, and psychological resistance to quitting. When you look at the research into competing in a dehydrated state, most of the research shows that performance is decreased in a dehydrated state depending on the severity of the dehydration, which I don't think is a massive shock to most people. There are only a small number of studies which have looked at performance after a period of dehydration and then rehydration, and I'm going to single out 2 here. The first study is titled here on screen. Repeat effort performance is reduced 24 hours after acute dehydration in mixed martial arts athletes. This study will examine 14 regional amateur MMA fighters over 2 testing days. On one of the testing days, they will do 3 hours of low-intensity cycling for 3 hours where they are encouraged to drink water. On the other day, they will do 3 hours of low-intensity cycling where they wear a sauna suit and are encouraged to abstain from drinking water. The goal of cycling in a sauna suit is obviously to try to replicate the conditions of a weight cut in MMA. To quote from the paper, The low power output of 60 watts was chosen to increase core temperature and promote sweating, but minimize muscle glycogen depletion. The subjects were then put through various physical tests at a time point, 3 hours after the cycling and then again 24 hours after the cycling. The tests they were put through were a medicine ball chest throw, a vertical jump test, a hand grip test, and a timed repeated sled push test to test endurance. The graph on the screen shows the results of the sled push test. This may take a moment to comprehend, but it charts 4 trajectories of the subject's average speed as they complete more and more sled push runs. The black square represents 24 hours later in the control as in non-dehydrated group. The black circle represents 24 hours later in the group who are dehydrated. You can see an arrow on screen here which identifies the speed of the sled push 24 hours after dehydration. Note that the speed of the sled push is slower 24 hours after dehydration than it was on the control day 3 hours after they completed the cycling exercise. The group completed the slowest sled push times when they were tested 3 hours after the dehydrated cycling. Note this group had 2 weeks between the dehydrated test and the control test. I'll leave a link to the full study in the description. If you look at the full results of all the tests, you can see that in every test they perform better in the case of testing following low intensity cycling with water compared to testing after water deprived cycling wearing a sauna suit. However, the most profound effects were the effects of the dehydration on cardio. The next study, which I'm to go over, explores why cardio might be reduced the day after weight cutting and implies there might be something about the weight cut which leads to a reduction in the number of red blood cells. You can see a link to the study title on screen here. Rapid weight loss and the body fluid balance and hemoglobin mass of elite amateur boxers. This study compared 10 amateur boxers who were experienced with weight cutting and compared them to 7 who were used as a control group. The weight loss group lost an average of 5.6% body mass during their weight cut process. To quote from this excerpt from the results, the decrease in THB mass. THB mass is being used here as an abbreviation for total body hemoglobin mass. Total body hemoglobin mass is being used to infer the level of red blood cells that are present. So to revisit the statement, the decrease in total body hemoglobin mass with a concomitant increase in plasma ferritin after rapid weight reduction is a surprising finding. Plasma ferritin is used as a marker of the level of iron in the blood. This is important as iron is a big part of red blood cells. So here they're effectively showing that the level of red blood cells have come down from 2 angles. Firstly, they have shown that hemoglobin is down, and secondly, they are showing that iron is up. The other factor to this is also the issue of health, which I'm not going to get into too much here, but I do think the potential for kidney issues with repeated weight cuts is something a lot of guys are underestimating. I say this as someone who is quite skeptical when it comes to CTE, so in general, I'm not necessarily ultra cautious. So overall, in conclusion, big weight cuts in the region of 20 to 25 pounds can be effective in MMA. However, whether or not they are optimal is a different story. Personally, I think a cut in the region of around 10 to 15 pounds is probably a realistic goal for the best performance. Past the 15-pound mark, you're probably looking at a guy with bigger muscles, but those muscles are probably depleted. It also seems that part of the mechanism through which big weight cuts decrease performance is through a decrease in red blood cell count. If this is true, then fighters using blood doping may be able to offset the negative effects of a big weight cut with performance enhancers.